Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Deep Dive. And today the topic is the Beatles. That's right, it's story time. Beatles, Let It Be, we're doing the making of. Now, Let It Be might not rank high among the all-time favorite Beatle albums, but the bizarre story of how its making has made it rock's most fascinating artifacts. No album made by the Fab Four began with such high hopes, and no album ended with so much hostility. So, join me right here on Route 89. My name is Fizza, and we're going to do a deep dive into the storied history of the making of Let It Be, one of the Beatles' most well-known albums. Now, the Let It Be sessions were the Beatles' last album, and the film where they were all performing together. The idea was that you'd see the Beatles rehearsing, jamming, getting their act together, and then finally performing somewhere in a big end-of-show concert. The whole process would be filmed and would become a television special, the beginning of reality TV, so to speak. So you'd have a sense of who they are, what their process was, and how they get things done. The Beatles had been coming apart since the White Album sessions, which took place in 1968. When the White Album was recorded, people around them said everything changed then. It became that Paul was doing lots and others weren't doing much more than being session men. The White Album may have sold millions of copies, but it was a record made by 4 individuals rather than a band. And that was the beginning of the internal strife within the band, and soon they broke up the band. Now, John Lennon in an interview once said, "By the time Let It Be got underway in January of 1969, we got fed up being sidemen for Paul. And the camera work was also set up to show Paul and not show anybody else." Lots of people at the time claimed Yoko Ono was such an intrusive and disruptive figure during the Beatles' recording session for Let It Be in early 1969 that it caused irreparable fractures between John Lennon and the rest of the group, and was the primary reason for the Fab Four eventually going their separate ways. But that wasn't the whole truth. Now, during that time, George Harrison wrote a song, I Me Mine, about the selfishness he felt festering in the band. The recordings in those early days did not go well. They all felt like they were no longer creating magic, and the camera being in the rooms sort of made them aware that it was a phony situation. They were just putting on a show of a band being together, performing together, but in reality, no one wanted to be there. When the fighting got too much, John Lennon would threaten to replace George Harrison with Eric Clapton. In fact, this threat came up a lot. Just imagine Eric Clapton as one of the Beatles. This led to George Harrison leaving the band mid-filming. He came back to finish the film and the album, but the bad feelings, they had settled. If there's one phrase that best sums up the Beatles' final album, Let It Be, it is this: the road to hell is paved with good intentions. It's strange to think that by the time they came to make Abbey Road, which was released a little over 50 years ago, the Beatles were a load of contradictions. The most obvious was that while publicly they appeared united, in truth, they were sick of the sight of each other. Left to the Beatles, Let It Be would have stayed on the shelf. But their money-hungry manager, Alan Klein, made sure that the album released, and it became the band's last album. The four kept it together long enough to make Abbey Road. John Lennon met with his bandmates and discussed making another LP, a Christmas album, and more. Everyone refused. That was when he truly knew it was over. The Beatles were over. They never played music in a meaningful forum with Paul again. With that, thank you so much for joining us. Have a fantastic day and stay tuned to City FM 89.